The biggest thing we need to do is make sure the engine bay is wide enough, long enough that there's enough room to even try. So fortunately, the only tape measure I can find is the one that doesn't retract, but it'll work well enough. What do you think, Pierre? Welcome to the shop. I'm Jared, and this is Wrench Every Day. Behind me, we've got our 1985, let's sell the whole thing, Honda Accord stretch limousine. We've named Honda Rousey during the Dust Ball Rally where we took it as a daredevil car. We, meaning myself, Henry, and our friend Gabe, we called Roberto. Keep holding it. We're gonna have to limp Honda Rousey back. Unfortunately, we think our exuberant playing yesterday has finished her off. So she's gonna have to go back. She'll sit, eventually get shipped back to Georgia, and she'll be back in the future. She'll redeem herself. Freddie was a little bit smart and didn't want any part of it, and he still may not want to jump in the crazy machine that is this contraption. The reason we've got Honda Rousey out is we got ourselves a big old shipment of parts that came all the way from the UK. There are a decent number of Jetta diesels in the country. There's some decent diesel tuning shops also in the United States. The reason I actually reached out to a company, Darkside Performance, in the UK is they road race the Jettas. They actually take these things, or the TDI diesels, they take them on the track, road race them, beat them to death. And to survive a rally, cooling is the #1 thing we need to take care of. And they had a ton of really, really smart, efficient cooling upgrades for these TDI diesels. So we went with that. Now, of course, you may be asking, why am I talking about a TDI diesel? It's a Honda. It's a gas engine. Well, we picked up a 2002 Jetta diesel. One viewer came up with a fantastic name that we loved, Jetta Thunberg. We're going to be actually cutting the car apart and grafting a lot of its components into the 85 Accord. But first, we should take a look and see what's inside this box. So, cut here. Ow. Cut here. Let's see how well we can make this work. Not very. Okay, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna go to a time lapse, and I'm gonna go ahead and get everything out of there, and then let's talk about what we bought. Got everything laid out. Let's go over all of the crazy parts we're getting ready to put onto this ALH TDI diesel. So starting on the fun side, the side that makes all the air, we've got this beautiful turbo kit. Now the diesel normally has a integrated, what they kind of call turbo folds, where the turbo is built into the manifold, but Darkside has got just this beautiful manifold. It's got this nice billet collector where it's not quite enough light and we're not focusing, but it's just this beautiful machined collector point in there. The welds are beautiful, this flange is nice. So we've got that manifold, and then we've got this awesome ball bearing turbo. Now, it looks small, but once we get the other factory turbo off, you're gonna see how big that thing actually is and how much air it's gonna move. It's the 2260 with the variable as well. We have that nice downpipe. We didn't get their full exhaust because they didn't offer exact fitment for Honda Accord Limo. We've got the power gate, which is the tuning interface. That is the oil, basically catch can breather filter system to add in. That's the opposite facing intake manifold, something that comes out of the UK. The race pipe EGR delete, all the little fittings and bolts and oil lines that you need to fit the turbo. These are actually upgraded head bolts.
At our point, we were asking if we needed to go to a head stud, and they actually said this would be perfectly fine. They are from the newer diesels with some ARP washers. These are our big upgraded fuel injectors. You got the 4 of them there. They come with the nozzle, the 320 size nozzle, which is basically the biggest that you put in it. We've got oil cooler fitting parts, intake parts. There's our actual oil cooler with universal brackets, and that is a thermostatic controlled oil filter adapter. We've got some keychains and air fresheners, and this car, it needs some air fresheners. It's a little smelly in there. So this is actually a really cool piece here. This is the water pump delete. And why it may sound weird that we're deleting the water pump is the factory water pump just isn't able to keep up at RPM. And you actually get into what's called cavitation, where you're getting air bubbles, and that air bubble creates hot spots around the cylinders, which then make things detonate, melt down. So we're upgrading to this awesome electric water pump. Looks like its own little turbo. Real nice impeller design. We've got the water pump controller, and this is a inline billet thermostat, because when you delete the factory water pump setup, you need to have a relocated thermostat. The other thing that we've got, so we've already got a manual transmission in our Jetta. The problem is the gearing in the US really isn't good for sustained speed. So we were looking at changing out just the 5th gear on the transmission to allow higher gearing, higher interstate speed, when the guys at Darkside let me know that in the UK, they got a 6-speed transmission. So this is actually the lowest geared 6-speed that's going to give us the highest interstate speeds possible. So that's the complete fitting kit. New throwout bearing setup. We've got the 6-speed shifter box, axles, this real awesome clutch that is pretty much a race clutch with good streetability with a custom flywheel. Actually lighter weight than the factory, even though it's quite a heavy piece. This part right here is when you start getting real high in the torque, you actually will bolt it to the case, and it reinforces the case to help keep it from breaking under heavy load. I mean, it's awesome how complete. There's so many just bags and boxes of the small little fiddly bolts that you sometimes overlook or forget. These guys have got everything piled up for us. If I remember correctly, this is enough to be well into the mid 200 wheel horsepower, nearing 400 foot-pounds of torque, which is an insane amount, especially considering I think we had, 60 horsepower, maybe. That brings us to the next set of problems for this car. Nobody sells a kit to bolt the engine in, and nobody really sells suspension upgrades for a Honda Accord of 1985. So the crazy idea that I have is actually grafting strut towers, subframe mounts. Basically everything underneath is going to be a Jetta, because we can find lots and lots of parts for it. So we can upgrade brakes, everything to make the car safe to go faster. That presents some problems. Frame rails are obviously different. Strut towers are going to be different. So the idea that I have is actually grafting inner fenders and subframe mounts. We'll actually have to probably build some stands to make it all work. The biggest thing we need to do is make sure the engine bay is wide enough, long enough that there's enough room to even try. So fortunately, the only tape measure I can find is the one that doesn't retract, but it'll work well enough. What do you think, Pierre? Okay. So we're going to kind of set it across, make some measurements. It'd be so much easier. So strut tower, center point to center point. What does that come out? About 42.5. The entire engine bay width, we're looking at, all right, it's 51 inches. Our front to back, all right, we're gonna come in at, it's gonna be, what is that, 32.5 inches. And then our height from unibody frame rail to our strut tower, that is, focusing on the wrong thing, So we're about 12 inches from the frame rail up. Now what is our diagonal? And get our broken tape measure to work. So we're about 57 inches diagonally in the engine bay. So that kind of gives us the rough spatial area that we're working with. We got about 12 inches up from the frame rail. So as long as we're there, or even potentially longer, we'll just shorten and cut and graft everything in. I'm pretty sure for all of our motor mounts and where the subframes bolt in, I'm gonna have to build some box steel plate that will use a subframe mounts to integrate into our subframe, or into the actual frame rails of the car. We'll have to build new mounts in the back. It's gonna take a fair bit, but it's only even possible if the Jetta engine bay is kind of within that close realm that we can even work with that. So Jetta Thunberg is actually at my house. We don't have her tucked into the mess here yet. Who's that standing there? Oh yeah, it's father-in-law, he's still here. We're gonna get to the house, make those same measurements to see, which I really hope that this absolute ridiculous, almost some would say stupid idea would work. So we're here with Jetta Thunberg, and of course it's raining and gross because that's all George has been doing lately. So I measured actually off camera to not get completely soaking wet what we might just end up with as far as engine bay measurements. And as you can tell, it's very precise and accurately written. The biggest things that we're looking at is our frame width. The Honda comes in actually a little bit wider than the Jetta. So in every dimension, the Honda engine bay is a little bit larger, except for, the frame rails are a little bit wider on the Jetta. So we may have to work some notching, but other than the frame rails, every other dimension, the Honda's bigger. So we'll have to figure that out. Again, the plan is to actually cut this strut tower section and graft it into a Honda. Yes, that's another 84 Honda. We picked one up to have a lot of spare parts because there's a lot of horrible rust. But again, I just think this really dumb and glorious idea is going to come to pass. We've got so much more compact of an engine bay inside the Jetta Thunberg here that we should be able to put that all together. It's going to get even more simpler. It's amazing how basic and simple this engine is, and how much more basic and simple it's going to get as we strip a lot of the extra components off and get the nice big turbo on it and everything. It's going to be fun. That's going to do it for kind of the unboxing, planning, ridiculous idea episode. Next time we pick up Jetta Thunberg and Honda Rousey, we'll be stripping the front ends, all the sheet metal off, then getting both of the engines out of both cars, building some jigs to hold suspension components together, and start cutting it all out and grafting it together. I'm Jared. This has been Wrench Every Day. I'd like to go ahead and remind you to always make questionable choices. And that's pretty much just it. Make questionable choices and put a diesel engine in a Honda limo. That's very questionable and bad in many ways, but also wonderful.